both before and after the Civil War. And you know, Montgomery was settled in 1819, and people began flocking into the area in order to grow cotton. And so we'll talk a lot about cotton today as we move along, and in fact we're going down and see a lady doing some spinning and weaving of cotton, and we're going to visit the cotton gin. But right now we're going to start here in what we call our swept backyard. And many of the settlers who came into Alabama believed that if you cleared your backyard out, didn't have any grass, anything growing in the backyard, then the snakes couldn't come up to the door. And it made it a lot safer to live in your house. Also, if the forest caught on fire and if the fields caught on fire, that swept backyard kept the fire away from your house. So this was a very important part of there wasn't any firefighting equipment much, just a well or a spring. So it was an important way to avoid having your houses burned down by fire. Now we're under what we call the scuppernong arbor. Grapes on the scuppernong arbor in the summertime provided good eating, provided a means of making jellies and preserves, and some people even made wine out of the scuppernongs. But even more importantly maybe than that, it provided a cool spot to work in, to visit in. Of course, it's a pretty cool spot right now, I realize. But it was also a nice area, leaves were out, and it was very, very pleasant to spend some time under the scuppernong arbor. And another way that our early settlers tried to keep cool, and you know how hot it is in the summertime, they built their houses like this, a dog trot. And you see that open passageway there? Of course, it's called a dog trot because the dogs could trot back and forth through the house. But it also allowed a breeze to blow back and forth through that area. Now, the earliest dog trots were built from one-room log cabins, and then they built another room just like it and connected it by open passageway. But this is dog trot, we call it a third generation because it was built much later, but they found out that this was such a great way to build a house. It made it cool. And then they could add rooms to the front and to the back and enclose the hallway, and then they had a house, this house right here, and many, many other southern houses before the Civil War were all built with a central hall because it helped to keep cool. Now we're going to move rather rapidly, so y'all stay right with me, and we'll talk about the buildings as we go down the lane. So just stick with me close by, and we're going to move, okay? It'll help us keep warm the faster we move. Huh?
We see another group?
Yeah. Not another group. No, we won't see another group. Okay, we're going to stop right here for a minute. This is all old Alabama town. And all of these buildings that we're looking at have been moved in. They were located somewhere else. All of them in this block that we'll be visiting were moved in, and we moved them in to save them because they would have just fallen down where they were. Now the building, the white building, if y'all look at that, is a Grange Hall. Now the Grange was a farmers' organization that came into existence after the Civil War for the purpose of educating the farmers, teaching them how to grow better crops, teaching them how to diversify, to get away from just growing cotton, trying to teach them to grow more foodstuffs. And it also was a place where the women could meet and learn how to cook better or sew better or weave better or make better quilts. So it was both for educational and social reasons. Now this building right here, the Carriage House, look at those fine bracketings up there. Now this building dates from the 1850s. This is an antebellum, which means before the war, before the Civil War. And this one was with a very fine mansion here in Montgomery. And if you turn around, you see a building with a big green roof. See that tall building? This is where this building originally stood, was on that property up there. Of course, it wasn't that tall. But this Italian mansion was built in the 1850s, and this was the Carriage House. There was a place in it for the carriage, there was a place in it for stalls for the horses, and then upstairs they had hay and food for storage. And so let's walk in very quickly now. There's a fine carriage in here. Now you can get an idea how they built buildings back then. They didn't have all the nails and materials that we have now. Can you see up there where See how this peg comes out between these two boards? What they did, they would cut out a section of one board, and then they would trim up. They called it mortised and tenoning. And the tenon is like a tongue of one board that fits into the slot that has been carved out in the other one, and then they would take a peg and peg them together. So right there you can see that peg right up there, how they pegged it together. And this carriage now is not quite as old as this building is. This is a newer carriage. It dates from about 1900. Any questions? Okay, let's move. He's going to take care of us tomorrow, too, because we're going to move those houses tomorrow. Okay? We're going to move them tomorrow. Good. We surely are.
I like the idea about the water fountain.
You like the water fountain? Yeah. And a barrel, huh?
Yeah.
Well, they would have had their water in a barrel in there, but we've got a little convenience they didn't have. We turn it on. Now, country doctors had their offices in rural areas, usually in the home, at their home or in the yard of their house. And our doctor, Dr. Thomas David Duncan, graduated from the Mobile Medical School in about 1892, and he came back to his small farming community at Fleta, which is down in South Montgomery County. And Dr. Duncan set up practice there, and there were no drugstores down in Fleta, so when he prescribed medicine, he mixed the medicine. And so he was acted as a pharmacist. And there were no dentists down in Fleta, so for minor toothaches, he could work on people's teeth. And there were no veterinarians down in Fleta. And so Dr. Duncan could also doctor on your horse and your cow if they needed help too. So let's go in very quickly and look at Dr. Duncan's office here. Microscope.
Microscope?
Yeah, microscope. They sure did. That's to take tonsils out with. You see, you could stick this down the throat and clamp the tonsil off with the little round circle thing, and then you see the little clippers there? Just clip those tonsils out right there.
It don't hurt?
It would hurt. Yeah, it would hurt. And what they would do, they would give the patient, if it was a grown person, they'd probably give him some whiskey or maybe a little chloroform to kind of deaden the pain.
What is shot?
The shot materials there.
What is that big old white thing now?
That is a bedpan. Very early type of bedpan. And see, these right here could pull a tooth right here with those instruments. So, and he did a little surgery. Now, if anybody had to have major surgery, he sent them to Montgomery because there were hospitals up here. But down in Fleta, just to have your tonsils taken out or a tooth pulled. That's a forceps. That was used for deliveries. So, now, some of the diseases that Dr. Duncan had to deal with were such things as hookworm. Hookworm. Let me tell you about hookworm. Hookworms were in the soil, and people, they made you y'all excuse me, and we'll move on out. Come out from behind the counter, please. Come on, round here. Okay? But hookworm, so many people had it. It made you very tired, and you just didn't feel like working, and the whole family would just suffer from hookworm.
They used to wear them?
Yeah, it was warm. Long johns. That's what they called them. Now we're going to go into a house now that has an unusual name. It's called a shotgun house. Now the shotgun house really came out of Nigeria. And when slaves came into Haiti in the late 17th and the 18th century, they brought the ideas of these long, narrow houses with them. And then after the Haitian Revolution that took place in the late 18th century, there were a lot of immigrants, both blacks and whites, that came to the United States from Haiti. And they settled in New Orleans and Savannah and Mobile and Charleston, and they brought the idea of this long, skinny house with them. And The shotgun house in the period after the Civil War offered a solution to the housing problem, because after the Civil War, so many blacks left the plantations and the farms and they came to town. And there were whites too that left the farm and came to town, and there was a severe housing shortage. But the shotgun house could be built on a very narrow lot, and you could build 2 rooms, and then if you wanted to add to it, you could just continue to add rooms. And there are shotgun houses in Montgomery that is deep as many as 8 rooms deep. Now this particular one was built in the 1880s, and it was built over on Bainbridge Street, about 2 blocks over. And it was built by Moses Brothers Realty Company, but they went bankrupt in the 1890s, and they sold off many of their holdings to help, pay off their creditors. And so this particular house and the one next door was sold to a man named Willis Cunningham. Mr. Cunningham was a black man, and he lived in one house, and he rented the other house to Grant and Viney Fitzpatrick. And Mrs. Fitzpatrick was a washwoman. Hundreds of women in Montgomery earned their living as washwomen before the days of the washing machine and the dryers. And so Mrs. Fitzpatrick was a washwoman, and Mr. Fitzpatrick worked for the railroad, for the ice plant, and for the cottonseed oil mills, which were at different times. So they lived in this house for about 20 years. So we're going to walk through. I want you to notice how the walls are papered, and we're fixing to repaper the walls in here, and we're going to repaper them just as they are now. So look at what kind of material you're going to see on the wall in here, and also look at the different things that Mrs. Fitzpatrick would have used in her profession as a washwoman. See the irons here and the ironing board, and that's the wringer over there, that strange look. Yeah, it's a real pie. Wouldn't eat it though. We sprayed it with stuff to keep the bugs off of it. So, but oh, it's not very old. It wasn't one of Miss Fitzpatrick's pies. All right, let's move in here now and look at the pie, look at the wallpaper as we come into the front room. Let's don't touch, please.
What's in there?
Just storage, some old quilts. The newspaper was a very good insulator, and it helped to keep the cold winds out. And and the rain.
Gonna be plenty cold wind in him now.
Right. And we would, that's a sewing machine.
How old is that?
That is what you would call, the ladies put them over their shoes, and it made them look like they had boots. And it sort of, added to the boots. They call them puttees.
Who is this?
We don't know. Someone gave us those pictures. It's a battling board to beat your clothes with. To beat your clothes. Stir the clothes and beat them. And there was that hook so you could pull them out of the pot. So you cooked it. Please don't touch. Please don't touch. That's right. So you could pull the clothes up, and then you could swish them around, and then you battled them or beat on them a little bit to get the. It's an iron bed.
Show me the book, man.
No, not a bunk bed. Now, I bet you know whose picture that is over the mantel, don't you? Yes, that's Mr. Washington. Someone asked who the other pictures were, and we don't know. People have given us the pictures, but we do not know who they are, but we do know who Mr. Washington is.
How old is that thing?
This house, this newspaper, it was reprinted from the original papers. It's not really as old as it looks like it is. And the newspaper, the Montgomery Advertiser, is printing us some more right now.
Y'all should have put some horses in here.
Well, we used to have a mule, but we don't have him anymore.
Probably does.
No, we sent him back to the country. He didn't like it in town too well. He did better off out in the country.
Ain't that one of well?
or a mule cart, and they would come over the federal road, which was the sort of a thoroughfare that was many thousands of people traveled on. And when they got here, they had to do two things immediately. They had to provide shelter for their animals because their lives depended upon the animals, their oxen, their mule, their horses, their cows. And so they built a pole barn, and you'll see what a very simple structure this is. It's just poles covered by rough-sawn boards, or they might have used split logs, but they provided shelter for their animals, and they also needed to provide shelter for their crop, because corn, next to cotton and corn, were their most important crops. So this log corn crib right here doesn't have a top on it, but they could pull the wagon loaded with corn into the pole barn and then stand up in the wagon and throw the corn over the top there. And it was a very happy farmer that had a full corn crib, because not just the animals depended on corn, but the humans did too. What are some of the things you can make of corn that we eat?
Popcorn.
Well, popcorn, you're right. That's certainly important. What else? Cornmeal, very important thing, yes. What about breakfast foods? What kind? Cornbread, but what were you? Grits, that's right. Very, very important. And hominy was something that people don't eat a lot of hominy anymore, but that was an important part of their diet as well. So grits and cornbread and various things that they did with meal were very important. And the husk off of the corn was often used to stuff mattresses and pillows. And the children often made corn husk dolls. And so corn was used every way possible. Corn husk in the mattresses, you're right. You're right. That's right. Rustled and rattled.
Does rain get in the house and stuff?
Rain.
Does it get in the house?
We hope not, but... Now, the next thing, let's wait right here and we'll look at this log cabin and talk about it before we go in.
Okay. They ain't gonna fall in?
Nope. Hope not. Now, I said they had two important things to do. One was to provide shelter for the animals, and another was to provide shelter for themselves and for the family. And of course, wood was plentiful, and so the log cabin was the type of housing that our first settlers lived in when they came to Alabama. And this particular log cabin came from down in South Montgomery County. And it originally looked like this, and then through the years it was covered over with siding. And so the people that owned this farm were going to tear down this old shack on their farm, and they started taking off the siding, and there emerged this log cabin. And it's a very fine, put together, what we call the dovetail method of joinery, where the logs fit one into the other. Notice how they're cut out so one receives the other. The two porches on this log cabin, one so they could work in the cool in the morning, and one so they could move around to another cool porch in the afternoon. So this was the morning porch, this was the afternoon porch.
What was the difference?
Well, the sun. See, in the morning you'd want a cool spot to work, and then in the afternoon. So in the morning, see, the sun comes up over here, so that porch right there would be cool in the morning, and then in the afternoon when the sun's over here, then you could move and work back here. So just another way of trying to keep cool. So let's walk in now. No, that one actually is that's a feather bed. That was a deer skin. Yeah, they use deer skins for many things. Let's don't touch, please. I would like to ask you not to touch, because if everybody...
Yeah, this just makes that wheel go around. And what's happening here, I'm going to spin the thread, it's going through a hole here, it's going over here, and then it's going to wind up on there. So first thing you do is to start a new bunch of fiber. You're going to have to put it there, and you're going to pull. Now when I pull, if you look up here by my fingers, you see that thread, that twisting up there? See up in here? See where it's twisted? it's making a thread. So I pull it out. First thing I do, I pull this out, and when I pull it out, as far as I'm going to pull it, I let it roll up on the spool. You see it going through that hole, goes up on that spool. You pull it out again. And you let it wind up again. Well, that's the way you make it. They used to make thread. We still do it that way. We haven't gotten out. And you do that several times. And that's the way a thread is made. Now, if y'all move back just a little bit, where I can get out of here, after you have spun your thread, you put it on this reel and you wind it up there. Now, that's 2 yards around, and when you've got enough thread, you dye your thread. Now, I'm going to move over here. Y'all don't get too close, so to stay back. So.
And was very dependent upon each other. Everybody had a chore, everybody had a job, and if you didn't carry out your part of the deal, then the whole family might suffer. In other words, if you were supposed to have milked the cow and you didn't do your job, you said, I don't want to milk, I'm not going to milk, nobody would have had milk for supper. And you know who would have been mad? Everybody in the family would have been mad with you. If you were supposed to draw the water and you said, I don't want to go to the well, I don't want to go down to the spring, then there wouldn't have been any water. And everybody in the family would have been mad with you. What if it had been your brother that was supposed to have milked and he didn't milk? You'd be pretty mad with him, wouldn't you? So everybody depended upon everybody else that lived in this log cabin. Any questions?
What is the seat to this rocking chair made of?
It is a deer hide, and deer hides were used not only for chairs, but for a great variety of things.
What is that?
That's to sharpen your knife. It's called a whetstone, and you turned it real fast, and it would sharpen the blade of the knife.
It's a spinning wheel.
It's a spinning wheel, right? And we're going over right in just a minute and see a lady and a real spinning wheel, and how that's a real one, but we'll see a working wheel. Okay, any questions? All right.
How did the kids get up?
Well, those stairs right over there. See, there's a very narrow, very steep set of stairs.
What did they put in the closet thing right there?
Huh?
What did they put in the closet?
Oh, well, they had storage, clothes, whatever. Okay?
Ain't that where they used to wash their clothes at?
That's right. And there's also see that big tub right there, big kettle. There was a syrup kettle. They could wash their clothes. Then after they killed a hog, they would boil the fat down, make lard. Yeah. Uh-huh.
This is the way.
That's right. You got it. That's right.
How do you use to tell how much it weighs?
Well, see, this right here, they would put these different weights on it, and when it all balanced out, then they would know they had a pound or half pound or whatever.
They didn't have food stamps back then.
Huh?
They have food stamps.
No, they surely didn't. No. Mm-mm. Okay, let's talk about this corner grocery, and it stood on a corner about 8 or 9 blocks from here, up on the corner of Clay and Dickerson Street. And the building, the store opened in the 1890s, and the storekeeper lived right next door. In fact, his house was attached to the store. And he and his whole family worked in the store. And they had the very basic needs. They had canned goods, they had some patent medicines, they had starch and soap and that sort of thing. But as far as chickens, as far as eggs and milk was concerned, they didn't, because people had their own chickens in their backyard, and nearly everybody had a cow, or your neighbor had a cow, and they didn't have any refrigeration, so they couldn't keep milk and they couldn't keep meats. And if you needed meat, you went down to the butcher shop downtown. But the storekeeper Opened the store at 6:30 in the morning. It stayed open till 9:30 at night. And since he lived right next door, if somebody needed something in the middle of the night, they'd come to the store and knock on, or come to his house and knock on the door. And so the storekeeper really was on call for 24 hours a day. And the store was an important social part of the neighborhood, as well as being a place to buy some basic goods.
There's so many things.
No, not really. Let me tell you about those cans. Several years ago, a company published books of old labels. And so we all saved our tin cans from home, and we cut out those labels and put them on the cans. But those are the kind of canned labels that would have been in the store. You know, they started canning food really about 1845. And by this time, by the 1890s and the turn of the century, they were pretty professional with their canning of food. Any other questions?
Ladies right here.
Stiff collars, very stiff collars for the gentleman to wear. See, your shirt wouldn't have, your shirts came without a collar, and you just attached your collar to it, and you kept them very stiff, and some of them were made of highly stiff fabric, and others were made of celluloid.
What is that?
That's the scales. Whether you could weigh your material. Okay, any questions?
What are the little branch things in the
Let me look over that.
They're buttons.
Oh, buttons. Okay.
shoe buttons?
Mrs. Neely, did they have paper bags to put the groceries in?
No, they had, see this paper right here? They tied everything up, or they brought a basket with them from home often. And they tied up in that, or they might have a string bag of some sort. But they would bring their own baskets from home. Good question.
I got blocks like this at home.
Have your sidewalk? They call them hex blocks. I like them. Okay, y'all sit down very quickly. I'll let you rest for just about a half a minute, and then we're going, because we're going to talk about the church. It will play, but we don't play it. It will play, though. It does work.
Smelled like a church.
Okay, let's all sit down now, please. Let's sit down. Sit down. We'll let you preach later on. Have a seat, please. Now, this church was built about 1890. And it was built by the congregation, the First Colored Presbyterian Church of Montgomery. And after the Civil War, the black and white Presbyterians had stayed together until the late 1880s. And then the black members of the congregation built this church at the corner of Cleveland and Stone Street. And later on, the name was changed to the Cleveland Avenue Presbyterian Church, and they continued to have services there until the interstate came through about nearly 30 years ago. And the bridges came practically over the top of the church, so they had to build a new church, and this church was moved into Old Alabama Town. And since that time, we've had many, many, many meetings and programs and activities in here. And this Sunday afternoon, we're going to have a very special program by a group of a cappella singers from Lee County called the Plantation Ayers, and they're going to be singing spirituals in here on Sunday. So I'd like to invite all of you to come. It's going to be at 2:30. There's no charge, and we're very happy to have you come and join us. It's going to be a real special program for Black History Month, and it also celebrates Valentine's Day. Any questions now about the church? Do you see that these benches, you had to sit pretty straight, right? And it'd be very hard to go to sleep in this church. Now we have added something that the benches didn't originally have, and that is the cushions. We have a slideshow in here. We show it sometimes. Okay, any other questions? A slideshow.
Well, show it.
Well, we're not going to see that this
I said
morning.
we're doing it.
Oh, well, we have a screen there, see, that we can let up. Okay? Any questions?
How did they light this church?
It was lighted by the late 1880s with gas lights, and then later on electricity began spreading through the neighborhoods around the turn of the century, and so, but gas lighting was the original method by which it was lighted.
How did all these people get in?
How did all these people get in? Well, it'll seat about 100 people. That's sitting pretty close together, but about 100 people.
Some won't stand up.
Might have. When you had a real standing room only. Yeah. Okay. Shall we go to our one-room school now? Right there. Right there. Well, I don't go hit you, but they did used to paddle children. They really did. Still paddle students, okay? It can happen. All right. Okay, let's talk about this school building now. This building was built in 1898 down in Barber County, and there were many, many, many one-room schools scattered throughout the rural areas of not only Alabama but of the United States. And as you can see, there must have been a variety of ages of people in here because the desks are different sizes. And so this school had from 1 to 7 grades right here in this one room. The older students helped the younger students, and after they finished the 7th grade here, many people didn't have the opportunity to go on to school anymore. This was all the education that some got. They began school in October and they closed in April. Now, before you start thinking, oh, how wonderful that would be, remember, why do you think they did that? Why did they start in October and close in April? Remember, it was a country school. What would they need for the students to do? Farm, work in the fields. And so they would work from April to September, and then they would go to school. And when they did go to school, they went from 7:30 in the morning until 4:30 in the afternoon, because they tried to get as much education as they possibly could in a short amount of time. All right, that's to put your inkwell in. Your